So, how in the world did a small Scandinavian country, the one famous for Legos and fairy tales, become a global leader in fighting modern-day pirates? Seriously, it's an incredible story, and honestly, it's a masterclass in global strategy. Let's get into it. Right, so when you first look at Denmark on a map, it seems, well, pretty small, a classic Scandinavian nation. But here's the thing. If you're only looking at its landmass, you are missing the entire picture. The real secret to Denmark's power isn't on land at all. It's at sea. And this is the number that changes everything. 10%. Think about that. A country with a smaller population than New York City controls a tenth of the entire world's shipping fleet. That doesn't just make them a big deal, it makes them a full-blown maritime superpower, one of the top 5 on the planet. So, with a fleet that massive, you start to see why the world's oceans are so important to them. They're not just some international highway, they're basically a direct extension of the Danish economy. Any threat to shipping, anywhere in the world, is a direct hit to Danish jobs, Danish companies, and their entire way of life. For a long time, piracy was this abstract problem happening far, far away. But then, in the mid-2000s, everything changed. That distant danger came crashing right into the Danish headlines, and suddenly they had to act. The real flashpoint was in 2007, when a Danish ship, the Danica White, was hijacked. All of a sudden, this wasn't some story on the world news. It was their ship, their crew. We're talking about a media firestorm, over 600 articles in just 3 months. The political pressure was immense. By 2008, Denmark was officially in the fight. And you can see why. By the peak of the crisis in 2012, this was costing their shipping industry a staggering 260 million euros every single year. Okay, so facing this massive threat, the Danish government and the shipping industry didn't just throw warships at the problem. No, they were much smarter. They built a whole playbook, a comprehensive, multi-layered strategy to fight back. And this defense had 3 core layers. The outer layer, that was pure military muscle, sending in the Royal Danish Navy. The middle layer was about making the ships themselves tougher targets, using a whole set of smart defensive tactics. And that final layer, which was pretty controversial at the time, was putting armed guards right on the merchant ships themselves. These best management practices, or BMPs, were basically a required survival guide for any Danish ship in a high-risk area. It was all about being prepared. You had to understand how pirates operate, figure out your own ship's weak spots, set up physical barriers, have a safe room, and always stay in contact with the military. The whole idea was to make your ship the hardest, least appealing target out there. But even with all those precautions, the industry was saying, we need more. So after a lot of lobbying, the Danish government passed a law in 2011 to allow what's known as PCASP, privately contracted armed security personnel. Basically, armed guards on board. And this was an absolute game changer. It was the last line of defense they'd been asking for. So just as Denmark and its allies were really getting good at fighting Somali pirates, the entire game started to change. The threats at sea began to evolve. The enemy wasn't just a criminal looking for a payday anymore. Yeah, the whole fight shifted. Back then, it was all about Somali pirates in the Indian Ocean, focused on hijacking for ransom. Now, we're talking about state-sponsored actors, complex geopolitical conflicts in places like the Red Sea, and a whole new set of dangers in the Gulf of Guinea. The old playbook just wasn't going to cut it. This new reality demanded a new strategy. You can't just have an anti-piracy plan anymore. You need a much broader vision, something that looks at the entire picture of global maritime security for the years ahead. And this new approach is so much more sophisticated. It's not just about having the biggest warship. It's about building strong alliances, sharing critical intelligence, and actually strengthening the international laws that govern the seas. So the modern strategy really stands on 3 pillars. Pillar 1, protect Danish interests. That's a given. But Pillar 2 is really interesting. It's about safeguarding the rules-based world order, basically upholding the UN law of the sea for everybody. And Pillar 3, doing it all through deep cooperation with partners like the EU, NATO, and the UN. But, throughout this entire time, even when the Danish Navy was incredibly successful at catching pirates, there was this one huge nagging problem. A legal nightmare, really. What on earth do you do with the pirates once you capture them? And I mean, the scale of this problem was just wild. Just look at these numbers. Between 2008 and 2015, Danish forces detained almost 300 suspected pirates. And out of those, only 50 were ever actually prosecuted. It became this incredibly frustrating catch and release cycle for the sailors on the front lines. And if you want the perfect, almost unbelievable example of this legal mess, look no further than the case of a pirate nicknamed Lucky Francis. To this day, he is the only pirate ever to be successfully prosecuted in a Danish court. But get this, after being found guilty, he didn't serve a single day of his sentence due to his health. It just perfectly highlights how broken the system was. So what's the solution to this catch and release problem? Well, it's brilliant. You shift your focus from the sea to the shore. Instead of trying to bring suspects all the way back to Europe, the new strategy invests heavily in soft power. This means they're helping coastal nations in Africa build up their own legal systems, strengthening their coast guards, and training them to patrol their own waters and prosecute criminals in their own courts. It's a sustainable local solution. Which, brings us right back to where we started. How does a small country like Denmark pull this off? How do they manage to play such a massive role in global security? And here's the beautiful paradox of their strategy. Denmark's secret weapon is its size. Because it's not a superpower, it doesn't have all the political baggage. Other countries see it as an honest broker, a trusted partner. And that allows Denmark to build coalitions and lead international efforts in a way that bigger, more powerful nations just can't. They punch above their weight through diplomacy, not just force. So it all leaves us with a pretty big question. In a world where the dangers at sea are getting more complicated every day, from pirates to full-on geopolitical conflict, could this Danish model be the answer? Could this blend of targeted force, smart diplomacy, and legal capacity building be the blueprint we all need to secure our connected world?